Okay, well, welcome to everyone to our virtual Coffee with the Curator session. And just a note here, as Rihanna mentioned, we've taken over the audio component because we do have 27 participants. So we'll save our questions and our comments to the end. If you're having trouble hearing me, just maybe wave in my direction. Otherwise, you can click on the participants and select the raise hand tab when it's time for questions. So again, welcome. It's my great pleasure. Sorry, am I muted? Are you hearing me? Yes? Okay. Sorry, I got a message that I was muted. So as all of you realize, we have some very special guests joining us this morning, several artists. We have the curator, Laura Brandon, and also the photographer for the exhibition catalog, Keith Bettridge. So welcome to all of you, all of our special guests, and to all of our regular members who are joining us today. So this is a gallery view of Illuminations. The exhibition was set to open on April 23rd and unfortunately has been put on hold with the focus on female artists, although not all the artists in this exhibition are women. There is a tremendous emphasis this year that we were having this for the summer on the contributions of women artists, including the Clara Harris, Between City and Country, and also Our Color with a U2, which was predominantly female artists also. So obviously something of a disappointment that we weren't able to open, but we do the best that we can. So Illuminations is a touring exhibition. It was curated by Laura Brandon, the longtime curator at the War Museum in Ottawa and a noted author and university professor. It has been circulating for approximately 18 months. It was on the East Coast and most recently in Toronto at Craft, Ontario. And now we have it here at RiverBrink. The exhibition was conceived as a sesquicentennial project to commemorate, to honor the creativity and the many contributions that women have made to the history of Canada. I think with her long experience, perhaps at the War Museum, Laura was a bit conscious that all of these commemorations tend to focus on the contributions by men and the Fathers of Confederation. And this was a really interesting opportunity to divert attention to sometimes the contributions that have been overlooked. And hopefully she will speak more to that towards the end of our presentation. So in her words, the exhibition, quote, honors Canadian women's creative past and inspires their future. The material used for the candle holders, these wonderfully inventive illuminations or objects to illuminate candle holders, came from silver that was donated. So silver used for the 15 different candle holders created by 15 different artists. And these, the silver came as a donation from Brandon's family and some donations from friends. So family silver, and for those who think about a bit about our own family histories and the place that family silver held a prominent position and prominent prized possession for some families, but nowadays is perhaps less than valued by younger generations. So the question became what to do with it. And out of this question came an idea of reusing the material in this wonderful way. So each of the 15 artists was provided with silver from this gift, and each of the different sculptures honors the contributions in different disciplines made by women. Several artists have based their work on research, very clearly identifying and naming women who've made contributions in different fields, some known, very well known, and then others lesser known. And other artists use this opportunity to address creativity in a more abstract way. So I think what impressed me was just the tremendous variety of approaches to this question of how to honor women's contributions. I must say that this experience of touring the exhibition is the least satisfying way to see this work because of just the wonderful, wonderful detail and the amount of careful looking that each one of these sculptures requires. So all are highly detailed with these wonderful little elements that on first glance you may miss. So here we're forced to take a bit of a longer view and to see these objects mediated by photography. Some wonderful photography provided by Keith Bettridge from the catalog and from our own staff at RiverBrink. So we're looking here at Questing Minds, celebrating nonfiction, Myra Tolonen-Smith. And here we have 2 candlesticks, could also be adapted to an oil lamp format. And I think if you look closely at the base, you'll see some of the, on your screen, if it's possible to see some of the names of the individuals that Myra has identified here. So this work honors Canadian women scientists from the past and the present. And I think when, certainly when I think of nonfiction, I think of biography, I think of some documenting historical events. So it was interesting to see this artist take it in the direction of the natural sciences, honoring Dr. Alice Wilson, a geologist and a paleontologist, Kathleen Conlon, marine biologist Catherine Hickson, a volcanologist, and the archaeologist Dr. Patricia Sutherland. But again, these academics and scholars and scientists have, how do we see their work? How do we get to know their work? And obviously that's through their writing and through their publishing. So an interesting interpretation of the nonfiction field. And I also thought quite a lot about this base, this wonderful granite base that you see the silver candlesticks protruding from. So just going a bit further into the room, Brigitte Clavet, and I believe Brigitte is joining us today as well. Drawing and painting, which she has titled For Molly Lamb Bobbick. Noted Canadian female artist, and again a wonderfully lyrical interpretation of the artist's craft. Here we've got obviously the brush and the pencil and even a stick to manipulate paint with, but then these other elements address, so there's a little pot, I don't know if you can see that hanging off the stick, in a way, and a reference to a flower, in a way drawing our attention to the many demands on women's lives, that it's, you're never just a painter or just anything, that there are very often domestic duties and everything from gardening to cooking that might pull you away from the thing that you want to be doing, which is painting. Molly Lamb, an important Canadian artist, the first Canadian female artist to receive a commission as a war artist during World War II, tasked with documenting the contributions of women in the war. So in a sense, a proscribed role, yet nonetheless an important first step for women artists to have that official recognition and receive a commission. And we have here Elizabeth Collusion for horticulture. This again is one of those lovely detailed works that it just cries out to be seen up close. So recognizing the role that women have played in documenting the natural world, recording plants through botanical drawings, and also cultivating gardens for food and for just beauty and appreciation. Here we have a detailed view. Sterling silver, leather, and gold. So these wonderful, wonderful little elements that when the exhibition opens, you'll all get a chance to look at closely. One of the two male artists who've contributed, Ken Vickerson, here, ebony and, jumping ahead, design, honoring different designers in both the industrial and aeronautics. So Elizabeth Elsie McGill, noted Canada's first female electrical engineer, aeronautical engineer, and aircraft designer. And here from the shape of this sculpture, you can see a reference to aircraft design very prominently. And then in some of the other materials that were used, plywood, and Ken is also honoring the pioneering women designers in both furniture and interior design and industrial design that followed World War II. And this is another example of how, even placing this and looking at it carefully, I had to go back and identify where there's a vintage hairpin that's been inserted, which I did not see at all, but it's a delightful little feature that you have to look closely to see. And then the names are engraved around the little candles at the bottom, at the base. Here we have three different works together on a table. Curayon, creative writing, and Jackie Anderson, ebony and ivory, and Chantal Gilbert, honoring gastronomy with l'abondance. So first, Curayon, the creative writing, some obviously very prominent, not well-known women writers, Gabrielle Roy, Carol Shields. And my first look at this, I'm thinking, well, these are autographs, but the artist has explained that she was attempting to indicate something about the style of the writing. So I think that's an interesting way of trying to convey not only the importance of these women, the accomplishment of these female writers, but also something about their style of writing, the kinds of creative fiction that they've produced. Jackie Anderson here, ebony and ivory, honoring music in this wonderfully conceived candle holder that mimics, well, we see a treble clef plus some ivory keys, so piano, and then conveying something of string instruments here, all combined together in this ebony and ivory sculpture. So here, honoring female musicians, composers, songwriters, and their names incised into the base. And we have Chantal Gilbert here, l'abondance on gastronomy. Interesting take, combining this anthropomorphic shape, combining the pea pod with female labia, and the very almost pregnant shape of this stylized figure, suggesting both reproduction and the creation of life, but then also food. So here, shapes are scratched and beaded into the surface, suggesting pollen and seeds and sperm with this very pregnant bulge, and the pea pods are pearl in a spoon at the base. So Gilbert's sculpture draws on ideas of the feminine rooted in biology, and in a similar way, Charles Funnell's Dancer, with this idea of creativity rooted into the very heart of what it means to be female. Here, with this figure of a dancer, very active, strongly grounded down and leaping in front of a curtain. Here using coiled silver to suggest this tremendous dynamic force of dance. I'm going through these quite quickly because I know that we'll have lots of things to discuss following it and hopefully bring in all of the artists. So I'll just give you a quick little introduction before we open it up to conversation. Here, Fiona McIntyre's honoring textiles and fashion with traditional techniques and materials. Here she's drawing on the kind of typical hourglass figure of a corseted late Victorian female figure with the heavy corset and the skirt billowing out at the bottom. And here the actual spoons are used in a very interesting way. So not melted down, but transformed into this quite evocative shape with this kind of stiff collar based on Victorian tatting and lace designs at the top. Moving on to photography and Barros, here the female gaze, drawing on what is most typically theorized as a male gaze, drawing our attention here to the pioneers, the women pioneers in photography, both behind the camera and in the darkroom, from the earliest days of photography in the mid-19th century. Sorry. Photographers such as Geraldine Moody and Millie Gamble. I'm not sure if this is one of Gamble's photographs here that we're looking at, but Anne can clarify that for us. And I love the way, through this kind of a clothesline structure, the way that these photographs are hanging on a line. It references both domestic duties and also the traditional darkroom techniques of hanging up photographs to dry following processing. So that too, the combination of domestic work and darkroom. And here, honoring theater, accomplishments in theater. The didascali is what we would call in English the stage directions, blocking that are inserted into a script. And this, I don't know whether you can, that's from the different angle, but each of these wonderful little shapes is interchangeable and movable, signifying the way that stage can use different objects in various ways. So both the human and the non-human aspects of theater referenced here in this sort of, again, an anthropomorphic shape, somewhat resembling a figure with the torso and legs, but all of these parts are interchangeable. So referencing both the sets and the props and the different colors and materials that are used to suggest a different range of materials in characters and emotions on stage. Here I'm showing you a longer view of the room from the opposite end, and Mary McIntyre's light cycle based on originally a zoetrope, literally the wheel of life in these wonderful female forms that support the structure at the top, that it spins this deer skin vellum drum that spins to allow the viewer to see a semblance, let's say, or a facsimile of a moving image in an early, very early idea of film, again from the 19th century. In earlier versions of this device, heat from the candle would make the device turn, so the viewer would look through the image, through the slits to see the image on the opposite side. So here honoring film, television, and video, simulating the moving images. And here we come to Lois Betteridge's craft, Life So Short, Craft So Long, to learn. And Lois is no longer with us. She passed away in February, but perhaps Keith will be able to give us a bit more information about the title. But Lois was tasked with honoring craft, and what an appropriate pairing that was. So here we have the shape on the right of a corseted figure, again symbolizing that restrictive clothing that women in the 19th century would wear. The candle holder is encircled by the materials of craft, the ceramics, the wood, the leather, glass, and textiles, with the fruit tree symbolizing the role of nature in providing materials, the source of materials, and the fire and energy needed to create different crafts. So this honors the important contributions women have made to craft in Canada, and obviously one of the most important contributors, Lois herself. She passed away at the age of 91, and when she began her career, silversmithing was dominated by men, and craft generally did not have the reputation as a fine art. Craftspeople, not craftsmen, not considered artists, so often marginalized by this negative perception. And so Lois will have seen that wonderful transition from early days into what we are seeing today as a recognition of this wonderful practice. And we have here Beth Elber honoring architecture, and I believe Beth also has joined us today. Here again with the small details, the names of women architects inscribed on the base, and with these with these structural elements encircling a hearth, in drawing our attention to the central place of the hearth in the home, and the central place of women really within a home, within creating a family. So a lovely combination of treatments here. And just another view from the side of their installation. And finally, we come to Marianne Barkhouse and her work, Dark Water, Safe Harbor. And Marianne has drawn on the two-row wampum as a visual reference here with the purple heartwood and the two silver canoes traveling on separate paths, parallel, in the same way that we know the two-row wampum represents the Indigenous peoples and the Haudenosaunee and the Dutch traveling on two separate paths, parallel paths. So here we have one canoe that suggests the fur trade looks very familiar to Francis Hopkins' depictions of fur trade, and then the stylized canoe of the Northwest Coast. So the 1613 treaty between the Haudenosaunee and the Dutch, otherwise known as the Gaswenta, was an agreement of mutual respect and friendship and peace. And in the Gaswenta, the two cultures are represented in purple wampum beads. The two rows are parallel, neither interfering with the other. The complex alliances were called the silver covenant chain, and periodic renewal called polishing the silver. So I think that's a very important reference that's being made here with our silver exhibition. And here, a side view from the bottom, the important figure, animal in Canadian history, the beaver, a catalyst for the exploration and exploitation and settlement and point of contact between Indigenous and Canadian settlers. So this sculpture honors current and historical women sculptors, finding inspiration in how they interpreted the landscape and the history of Canada. So as I've said, this is an exhibition that requires careful looking and a lot of time that unfortunately in this first look for many of you, that hasn't been possible, but hopefully in the coming months we can open it up to visitors to see and extend the exhibition so that can happen. So I'd like to bring the rest of you into the conversation now. So any of the artists or Laura, the curator, or anyone else who would like to make a comment or ask a question. Again, it's a lot to manage, 27 voices, so we'll have you just raise a hand if you wouldn't mind.
Marianne, I've unmuted you if you'd like to speak.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say that in my piece, the canoes are not supposed to be parallel, because I know the original, the agreement that it's referencing indicates that the canoe, that was the idea behind it. But the fact is that history has played out very differently. So the canoes are supposed to be sort of at angles to each other, just to sort of complicate the, I guess people who know me will say, yes, of course, Barkhouse is being complicated.
Well, thank you for that. We'll make the adjustments.
Okay, thank you.
Here. I've either bored everyone or everyone's gone silent.
I think we're all muted.
Yeah, so if you can.
Myra wanted to speak.
Mm-hmm.
There was a note saying Myra wanted to speak.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Myra, you're unmuted if you'd like to speak.
Hello. I just wanted to speak to my piece to say that it's not obvious what my inspiration was, because I took a different path. I actually read all the books from those women, and they were all adventurers. And when I was looking for inspiration for my piece, I decided to become an adventurer in honor of their stories. They wrote these amazing stories about true life adventures. So I joined the Paleolithic Club, and I went fossil hunting, and the shapes represented in my piece are actually inspired by what I found as fossils. They're worm tunnels and crinoids and it's not an obvious direct visual image that people would be familiar with, but that's what the inspiration is from. So it's a different path to finding my image. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's always great to.
Is it possible to get Myra's picture back on the screen?
Sure.
Thank you.
Well,
Sandra, you're unmuted if you'd like to ask your question.
yeah, thank you. While we're waiting for the picture to come up, I had a question about the premise of the exhibition that wasn't clear at the beginning. So I wondered, Laura, if you could explain how each artist was given their topic. Or their subject matter, or how they did it, because sorry, I don't know if this is coming through, but each artist obviously had a title that they were going for, or a category. And did they just choose at random, or did you have a number that they could select from? How did that work?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
The way it worked was that the 15 was significant because 10 times 15 equals 150. So it was one per decade. So there were 15 topics relating to women in the arts. So poetry, then we had to group them. So not every art got its own category. That's why video and television and film are all together. And then the artists themselves selected which topic they were interested in and did an enormous and impressive amount of research to marry the idea of a historical record of Canadian women's contributions to the possibilities that the medium of silver could offer them. And I think many, and I can't really speak for all of them, but I think many were absolutely fascinated by what they found out. And that, I think, shows in the pieces where the names of Canadian women contributors to the arts are actually engraved or etched into surfaces.
What was your inspiration or concept in pulling all of this together and deciding to use your family silver? I mean, what sort of is behind that?
Well, Debra alluded to it. I was doing a long drive to Prince Edward Island in the summer of 2015. And everything I was hearing about the sesquicentennial was about Fathers of Confederation. And it also, the sesquicentennial was the Battle of Vimy Ridge. And these were all male endeavors. And I had been spending a lot of time dealing with packing up family stuff and finding homes for it, which so many of us have to do at some stage in our lives. And I thought about the material that I had inherited, which was basically the autobiography of the various women in my family going back. And although I sound English, I'm actually Canadian, so it's Canadian silver that was involved. And the fact that they all recognized what craft was, and they wanted to have beautiful things in their homes. They also supported endeavors by reading, by collecting art, by painting themselves, by learning music. My grandmother studied in Berlin to learn to play the piano for a year. This kind of thing was part and parcel of who they were. And they laid the groundwork for the kind of culture that we can appreciate today, but in a different and much more limited way, because they were, in many respects, limited to what they could do from the home front. Their roles were not nearly as public as they are today. And I put the two together, and I just thought I want to do something that honors the contribution of women to the arts as contrast to the achievements of men, which were much more militaristic and political in terms of the sesquicentennial. And that's where it started. I had the means, in the fact I had all this silver, and another family contributed half the silver. And we both came from very similar backgrounds where people just accumulated this stuff. And I think the final thing that did me in was when I discovered that usually when families end up with silver that they can't deal with, they ship it off to be melted down and it becomes dental fillings, for example. And I just thought, I can't do that. That is no way to honor these women who are kind of pioneers in their own right. And that's where the project began. But it would never have happened if it wasn't for Lois Etherington Betteridge, because I knew nothing about silver or metal craft whatsoever. And I went online and her name popped up first. And then I went to the Museum of History's collection and saw that they had quite a few pieces. So I thought, well, I'll write to her and ask her how on earth I contact 15 silversmiths. And there was a bit of a gap. I sent her an email and then I heard back and she said, I'll find them for you. And that's how it began.
Thank you, that's wonderful.
Mary McIntyre, you're unmuted if you'd like to speak.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people who are interested in our show, and it's also wonderful to see again the shining faces of so many of my other friends in the Metal Collective. It's been way, way too long. And I hope that we are all again in the flesh soon. I just wanted to talk a bit more from the other side of the bench, so to speak, about this process that Laura talked about. It was an exciting one for us, and if I can, speak on behalf of, my friends, it was a really interesting process for us because as a collective, we typically choose our own themes for our shows, which we do every, 2 or 3 years, just because we feel the need to torture ourselves. This was the first time that we worked with an outside curator, especially one who, as a professional, had some very specific ideas about how the development of theme for a project like this should unfold. And it was a really interesting process because there was a real negotiation back and forth between, how literally we should be interpreting this overall theme, which originally, had been something about like find a person in your field or find a school or a group of people in your field and talk about them. And while I understood the desire to respect specific women's contributions, there was also a sense that in some cases, particularly when we were talking about overlapping forms of work or disciplines, that it wasn't going to be possible to find a person. And also there was the difficulty that if you tried to be too kind of generic, then you ran the risk of creating something that was banal because it didn't have any specific point of reference and it didn't have an anchor. So it was a real challenge for us to find a way to thread that needle, to use a domestic metaphor. And I think it was a real growth opportunity for sure for us to interact with someone who did not know our discipline, whose curatorial work was in what's typically called the fine arts, in painting and drawing and photography. So for her to sort of grapple with us in the three-dimensional and the craft medium, which has got a whole other sort of intellectual and creative set of traditions to it that are separate from the fine arts, and to be doing it also in a non-institutional setting, that we were all just kind of, just freestyling it, without having an institution like the Canadian War Museum to provide sort of bona fides. We were just out there. And so, you know, it was like Laura had an opportunity to join our little band of outlaws and just kind of make a show and then try and pitch it to people. And it was, you know, it was, I hope, exciting for her. It certainly was for us. And I think overall, you know, I think we've all been very happy with the result.
Thank you. Yes, I'm struck by just the tremendous diversity of approaches that artists can be so surprising, the different routes that they take when given a simple task. Not so simple, but yes, this incredible diversity.
Yeah, I would say that the one thing that really unites us is the fact that we are all students of Lois's at one point or another in our careers. I mean, Lois stands at the apex of a family tree of Canadian metalsmithing. You know, she was a doyenne and a grandmother and many other things to us. And pretty much anybody now who is a metalsmith in Canada was trained by Lois or was trained by someone who was trained by Lois. And it's a tremendous heritage. It's a tremendous thing. And you know, we feel her loss as a touchstone for us. And you know, so many of us in the studio have, you know, speaking privately between ourselves, we've talked about all of us having that moment in the studio where you think, what would Lois do? You know, when faced with some particular technical challenge or an aesthetic decision, you just think, what would Lois do in this circumstance? And, you know, you may find yourself making a different decision because we've been trained by her, but part of that is that has given us all the ability to go out and take this learning and take it into a whole bunch of different directions. You know, some of us are still firmly sort of on the bench. Some of us are taking metalsmithing and integrating it with other kinds of installation work, with digital design, with mixed metals and mixed materials even. You know, Lois was trained in the middle of the 20th century, and she was a pretty thoroughgoing modernist as far as I can tell. And some of us are not. And so it's definitely reflected in the breadth of the aesthetic breadth of the work that's in the show. But for all of us, there is, you know, like a little angel, Lois sitting on our shoulder, you know, watching what we're doing. And, you know, at one point or another, we're all in dialogue with her as we, you know, take what she gave us and take it in all the directions that each of us is doing.
Thank you. So we have some resources, including the very nice obituary for Lois. For some of our visitors won't perhaps be familiar with her life and her career, so that'll be available on our website, along with a short video to give you a better sense of what it's actually like to move into the space and see the work installed in advance of us at some point hopefully being able to open and maybe even see and meet all of you in person. So that will be something that we'll look forward to.
So,
unless there are some other, Anne, okay.
Sorry, we have a few more questions, so I'm going to unmute Anne Barros if she'd like to speak.
I just want to say how great the show looks from this virtual distance I have. I like the wood, the warmth of it, and the way you've displayed each of the pieces, you know, so respectfully with distance. Congratulations, Debra and the RiverBrink for your good work in difficult times. And
yes, the lighting isn't done yet.
Oh, well, I can't tell. And I just want to say that the most fun for me in this whole project was the research and learning about women and what they were doing at, say, the turn of the century out in a logging camp in British Columbia with a camera, taking a selfie. I mean, I never would have imagined. And so I thank Laura for, you know, giving me the opportunity to learn about, you know, the history of women in Canada. That's it.
And Kim Etherington Reed, I'm going to unmute you now if you'd like to speak.
That's one. Has to be one that's working.
Sorry, there seems to be an issue. There you go.
I'm muted. I'm unmuted. Okay, sorry. I don't know whether you heard me earlier. I'm Lois's niece and Keith's niece. I just wanted to thank you for including me in this conversation. And particularly, I want to thank those words from Lois. He was truly a remarkable person, and obviously the craft evident through the brilliant and beautiful work that I've seen today. I know everybody's name, although I haven't met most of you, but Lois has spoken admiringly and fondly about many of you. And Laura, this is a brilliant, brilliant project. I'm very, very pleased that you were doing this for the women in Canada, both past and present. So thank you very much. That's it.
Anyone we've missed?
If anyone else would like to ask a question or speak, you can raise your hand by selecting the participants button in the bottom row of your screen. Laura, you can go ahead, you're unmuted.
I just wanted to thank everybody at RiverBrink for everything that they've done. It must have been so disappointing for you not to have been able to have an opening and to have the show up and available. And, you know, we're working towards having, well, we've agreed that it will continue to be up into the spring of next year. So with luck, people will be able to see it in reality. And I also wanted online to say thank you to all the artists, and in a way especially to Lois, who can't hear me anymore, because if she had not come on board, this project would never have happened. So I'm grateful to her for her support and enthusiasm, as much as I am to all of the wonderful creators of this work and the institutions that have hosted the exhibition.
Well, thank you, Laura. I'm very pleased that we were able to host. I'm very pleased that we were able to host. Thank you.
And I think we have two more questions if we have time. Beth Elber, you'd like to speak? You're unmuted.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'd just like to say a couple of things more about my piece, which was architecture. And the main forms in the piece are roof trusses. And I think through the research that I did, you could say it was split between two sides. And one would be the technical side of building, and the other would be of who the women were and what they were doing and how they navigated their way through the system. And as you all know, and I think it's true for all of the categories, the women that persisted had a very difficult road. And so most of the women architects that I saw, I divided them into decades. And first one graduating in 1921 to moving forward to today, where there are many, many more involved in the field. So for each 10 years, there's a roof truss. that starts as sort of a jumble down at the floor and builds its way up into moving forward. And the last one is moving forward out into what will be the future. And women are very clearly there. So I'm very, very happy about that discovery. And also, you know, the form of the roof truss. The roof is what holds up the roof. And I think that that's a metaphoric statement that women do hold up the roof. And so that was the sort of underlying concept behind the work. And thank you so much to everybody who spoke today. I thought that all of the comments were really, really constructive and very clear about what the exhibition is about. And I learned a few things from it after all this time too. So that was really gratifying. And so I'm looking forward to seeing the show in real one more time at least. And so can't wait for that to actually happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And again, this is just another demonstration of how much detail and how much thought went into each one of them. I think there's a paper to be written about each one of these 15 pieces that I've only glossed over the surface, I think, of so much of it. But thank you, all of you, for your comments and your participation. Was there another one?
We have a few more. Denise, go ahead.
Yes, a beautiful pieces, so creative and so meaningful and so layered. It's actually very touching and emotional as I'm going through many of my mom's silverware in her collection. But will the exhibition be going to other galleries? Are there plans for it to move across the country or the province?
We're kind of at the end, but I'll maybe defer to Laura.
Am I unmuted? Yes.
You're good.
Yes.
Okay. RiverBrink is the last venue. And then the plan is to try and persuade the Crown Collection to accept the exhibition as a whole, the 15 artworks, so that the works will become the property of Canada. And when I dream very large, my original dream was that they would be in Rideau Hall, so that when people came from overseas to Canada and were given a fancy dinner, they were reminded of the fact that women in Canada have done so much for the arts over its history. One of the interesting aspects to the sesquicentennial, which we haven't drawn upon, was that round about the time this project was being created, the Truth and Reconciliation report came out, and that has completely changed the language about Canadian culture and Canadian history. And if I were to go back to 2015 again, I would probably have worked much, much harder to make sure that this was not quite such a westernized view of Canadian women's contributions. But you can only answer to the time in which you live and the knowledge you have. And it would not be fair of me not to say that I was probably a very ignorant person in 2015.
Okay, thank you for sharing that.
Yes, I think we all have lots to learn and have learned. So thank you.
Valma, you can go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to thank you all very much for inviting me today. I found the exhibit very moving, very powerful, such a wonderful appropriating, bringing through the family silver, bringing through the tradition of the women in your family and bringing this through into the beautiful, beautiful exhibit today. Thank you all so much.
You're welcome. Any others?
Kim, go ahead.
Hi, Laura, you mentioned about being ignorant in 2015. I think that one of the marvelous points of the work that is on display is how many women are recognized for their past and current brilliance in many fields. And it would be lovely. I haven't seen the show. I've only heard of it, and I saw Lois working on her piece at various points, but is there a way that the women whose names are mentioned through this sculpture, who each of these pieces are honoring, is there any written record from each of these sculptors of the metalsmiths that we can reference at a later point, so that we also get to learn about the various women who are being selected in these pieces? Does that question make sense?
I'm not sure. Yes, I can answer. At the moment, all we have is the catalogue, which does not tell you an enormous amount. That's published and printed. There was a review written, which we tried to get into Studio Magazine. To the best of my knowledge, it is still not printed, but it provides more information. But probably the best thing to do is to gather up the research material and put it together as an archive and donate it to an institution, possibly OCAD or NASCAD, one of the institutions where craft is taught, as a resource for that is accessible. Because in times like this, where we're now becoming more increasingly reliant on digital communication, it may well be that notes and drawings and sketches and thoughts are best documented digitally within institutional collections so that anybody anywhere in the world can access them. I don't know, we haven't got to that point.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, so it would be interesting to get a list anyway from, do any of the artists have any kind of information that can be shared past this point that perhaps we could have access to initially before going beyond that? And
There
that
are
be...
artist statements.
Okay.
They travel with the exhibition. They're in a binder, and I think you do raise a very important question, is that maybe we should see if we can collect them together in an electronic form. There is a website for the exhibition, and maybe we can put them up there.
Okay, that would be fabulous. It would be helpful. Thank you.
I'll have to stop quilting to do that. For a non-craft person, who would have guessed?
Anne Barros, did you want to speak to that?
I was just going to say that each artist had provided a statement, and that would include the research, and we could put that together. But Laura's already said that.
Thank you.
Great. Any more questions?
Keith, go ahead.
I just want to say what a lovely show this was, and that life's so short, craft so long to learn is very appropriate. It's a quotation from Chaucer.
Thank you. Now, I guess we're coming up to the hour, so unless there are any more questions or comments, I'll thank everyone for joining us. Am I muted? Okay. I'll thank everyone for joining us today. I'll just put a plug in for our next one coming up on June 12th. And also, as has been mentioned, there is a catalog for the exhibition, so we do have that for sale. And it has some wonderful photographs in it that you've seen today and some text, so it does make a very nice addition to the exhibition. So again, thank you to all of you for joining us. And it was really a special treat to have the curator, the photographer, and all of these artists joining us. And I hope all of our other visitors enjoyed that as much as I did. So thank you, and hopefully at some time in the future, I'll meet you all again in person. Thank you.